In 1999, a black cuboid with dimensions that exactly fit the ratio of 1 by 4 by 9 was found buried on the Moon near Tycho crater. Dr. Hayward Floyd, the chairman of the National Council of Astronautics, and 5 others visited the dig site, arriving at lunar morning. When the monolith was first struck by sunlight, it emitted an extremely strong radio signal that was targeted at something in orbit around Jupiter. The USSC Discovery-1, already being built in Earth orbit to survey the moons of Jupiter, was then secretly retasked to visit the destination of that signal. The first of the 4 sections that made up the Discovery was the command module, a 16.7 meter diameter sphere with a wide window to the flight deck and 3 large pod bay doors on its front. A small airlock was placed on the port side in line with the pod bay doors. On the top and bottom of the sphere was a set of blowout panels, behind which was located an emergency communications antenna on the top, as well as a telescope and a number of deployable probes on the bottom. Inside the command module was a 10.86 meter diameter centrifuge, rotating at roughly 5.2 rpm, creating gravity roughly on par with the Moon, with an attached flywheel to store rotational energy if the centrifuge had to be despun. This centrifuge, accessible via a single ladder, contained beds, seating, entertainment, an automatic kitchen, stations for operating scientific equipment, and hibernation pods. These pods put the user into a dreamless sleep state where they breathed once per minute, had a heart rate of just 3 BPM, and a body temperature of only 3 degrees. 3 of the 5 crew were placed into these pods, Doctors Hunter, Kimball and Kaminsky. These 3 made up the survey team, placed into hibernation before departure in order to stretch the life support as far as possible. The remaining 2 people, Mission Commander Dr. David Bowman and Second in Command Dr. Francis Poole, made up the flight crew who spent the entire trip awake alongside the onboard AI, HAL 9000. Thought of as the 6th crew member, HAL ran on a 9000 series computer and viewed the inside of the ship through a series of red-eyed cameras scattered throughout the command module. The logic memory center for the computer was built into a confined, red-lit room that was only comfortable to work in freefall, with the various solid-state logic and memory units lining every surface. These were capable of reproducing most of the functions of the human brain, but faster and with complete and total reliability. No 9000 series had ever made even the smallest of errors, a fact that HAL was seemingly very proud of. Such a powerful computer was needed since HAL controlled and had full responsibility over every system on board. For all intents and purposes, HAL was the brain and nervous system of Discovery. Apart from overseeing the ship and its systems, HAL played an important role in tracking the physical and mental health of the flight crew. As part of this, he could play board games against them. To maintain morale, he was programmed to win only 50% of the time, a fact that the crew pretended to not know. Also contained within the command module was the bay for 3 work pods. These were small, single-person craft launched from an extending platform that carried them outside. Since there was no airlock for these pods, the entire pod bay had to be exposed to vacuum when launching. The pods were powered solely by the RCS clusters mounted to their sides. On the front was a small window and 2 floodlights for the occupant to see what they were doing, as well as a HAL camera since he could remotely control them. A pair of rotatable manipulator arms also extended from the front. Access to the pods was enabled by a sliding door on the rear that, due to having explosive bolts built into it, could be ejected. Despite having the capability to fully pressurize or depressurize the interior, the occupant typically wore a spacesuit in case of a hull breach, or if they needed to EVA. There were 4 suits on Discovery, each in a different colour: red, yellow, blue and green. They all had a backpack with built-in manoeuvring thrusters, and the visor was tintable with a touch of a button on the wrist-mounted control pad. When not in use, 3 of the suits were stored within the pod bay, and 1 inside the crew airlock leading off of it. Attached to the rear of the command module was the emergency propulsion system. This was intended to push the command module to a safe distance from the rest of the ship if something went wrong with the reactor. Docked to the EPS was the 84-metre-long spine of the craft, upon which were mounted 11 racks of liquid ammonia propellant tanks. A large communications array was mounted to the 7th of these racks, consisting of one large communications antenna and 2 smaller telemetry antennas. The whole array could fold flat against the spine. These were used for contact with mission control back on Earth, as well as transmitting news and personal messages with an ever-increasing time delay. Docked to the end of the spine was the combined reactor and propulsion segment, kept as far away as possible from the critical habitation section to reduce crew radiation exposure. Inside this was Discovery's gaseous core nuclear reactor, the key part of the Cavrodyne plasma propulsion system that terminated in 3 large hexagonal engine clusters. Within each of these were 2 main engine nozzles, as well as 3 vernier nozzles for manoeuvring. After a false fault prediction by HAL that was contradicted by a twin 9000 series back on Earth, Bowman and Poole used a work pod with the transmitter disabled to discuss HAL's apparent malfunctions, deciding to disconnect him if the predicted failure didn't happen. Despite attempting to keep their conversation from him, HAL was lip-reading through the window. During the second EVA to return the potentially defective unit, HAL attacked Poole with a work pod, sending both him and the work pod hurtling off into space. Bowman, who wasn't aware of exactly what happened, headed out to rescue Poole. While he was outside, HAL triggered a deliberate malfunction in the hibernation pods, killing Hunter, Kimball and Kaminsky. Upon Bowman's return, HAL refused to allow him back on board, saying that he knew Bowman was going to disconnect him. HAL could not allow this, since it could have jeopardized the mission. Bowman was forced to use the crew airlock to gain entry to the ship, and was briefly exposed to vacuum since he had forgotten his helmet and gloves. After getting back on board, he proceeded immediately to HAL's logic memory center and disconnected his higher processing functions. Once done, a pre-recorded message from Dr. Floyd began to play, explaining the real mission of the Discovery. Bowman continued alone, rendezvousing with an immense monolith in orbit around Jupiter. He took the last remaining functional pod out to it and vanished. Many years later, the Soviets propositioned Dr. Floyd with an offer to take Americans out to Discovery on their ship, the Alexei Leonov. Along with Floyd, Walter Kernow, the designer of Discovery 1, and Dr. Chandra, the creator of the 9000 series, were chosen to go. Upon arrival, the Leonov found Discovery spinning end over end. This was due to the centrifuge transferring its rotational energy to the rest of the ship via friction braking, with flex in the long craft causing the spin to precess from the long axis to end over end. Its close proximity to Io had also coated the exterior in a layer of sulfur, but the craft was otherwise intact. After the crew of the Leonov brought the Discovery under control, the 2 ships headed to the monolith. During the process to revive HAL, Dr. Chandra had uncovered why the AI had seemingly malfunctioned and killed the crew. An order had been inserted into his programming stating that the real purpose of the mission was to be kept a secret until arrival. Essentially, HAL had been told to lie. This was a direct contradiction of the design of the 9000 series, the accurate processing of information without distortion or concealment. This trapped HAL in a logic loop. To escape, he determined that he had to kill the crew. If there was no crew, there would be no one to keep the secret from. Sometime after, the long-absent David Bowman contacted Floyd, telling him that the ships needed to leave in 2 days. The only possible way they could leave before their low-energy transfer window was to connect the 2 craft together with the Leonov's docking claw, and use the Discovery as a booster rocket for the Leonov that had everyone on board. Near launch, the Leonov crew sighted a dark spot on Jupiter made up of a vast amount of monoliths that appeared to be sucking the planet into it. As the 2 craft completed their respective burns away from the now shrinking planet, Bowman contacted HAL. He told him to point the communications array towards Earth and to transmit a message on repeat for as long as possible. Discovery was caught in the resulting shockwave and was destroyed. The Discovery was an exceptionally significant vessel that turned out to be key to the plans of those behind the monoliths, and helped to not only usher in a new age for humanity, but also to bring new life to Europa.
Thank you for watching Spacedock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the links on the screen right now or in the description below for our Patreon and channel membership services. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving our team and our equipment and allowing us to put together bigger and more exciting video projects for you guys on the channel.